One swearword cost Charles Leclerc 10,000 euros due to an F1 swearing rule. Formula 1 has had some heavily ridiculous rules that regulate the sport, and that's why today we'll be taking a look at some of the most ridiculous past and present F1 rules, ranging from least to the most absurd. The first weird rule is the 107% rule, which the FIA introduced in 1996. What it essentially did was limit any driver that wasn't able to be inside the 107% from the fastest first qualifying stage's lap time completely from racing in the Grand Prix. Now, the reason why I place this rule as the least weird is because of the way Formula 1 does qualifying sessions. In F1, qualifying regularly takes place on Saturdays, well, unless, the Japanese Grand Prix we're talking about. During each regular qualifying session, the race grid is always determined by running 3 qualifying stages called Q1, Q2, and Q3. But during the first 2, the 5 slowest drivers are straight up wiped out from the next stage. Now, this rule only applies to Q1 and when the circuit is in dry weather. The reason why I think this rule is weird is because I've never really seen it take place when it was supposed to. With the best example being the 2016 Hungarian Grand Prix, where 11 drivers failed to qualify inside the 107% rule, but somehow still competed in the race just because their practice lap times were decent. Now, if you do fall behind the 107% from the fastest Q1 lap time, you still have a chance to be in the race, but you have to have special permission from the FIA. But still, I think it's a pretty weird rule because just because you're doo-dooing qualifying practice doesn't always mean that you'll be bad in the race. Because maybe the drivers just need more time to settle in after all the yak parties that they be having, or the car needs to stop braking on each single corner. I'm looking at you, Ferrari. The second weird rule is once again a qualifying one, and it was called aggregate qualifying. Now, I generally don't know how to explain how ridiculous this rule was, but all that I'm gonna say is that it took just 6 races for the rule to be completely abolished from the sport. But what made that rule so ridiculous? The aggregate qualifying rule required drivers to complete 2 qualifying laps on different fuel loads on 2 different days, and the added up times decided the racing grid for the actual race. Meaning that on Saturday, each driver completed a fast lap with low fuel and then had to go and crawl out of bed before a Sunday race to drive another quote-unquote fast lap with, a full tank of fuel filled up. This made the whole qualifying standard incredibly confusing because, first of all, not everyone even understood how the rule even worked. Secondly, changing weather conditions could have completely annihilated a driver's Saturday fast lap if the weather changed drastically from Saturdays. Now, you might say that this sounds intriguing, and to that I would say, nuh-uh, and I hate you. Just why make everything so complex? It's just simply better to have a qualifying system where the drivers just have 3 opportunities over the same day to showcase how quick they are around the track than to do it over the course of 2 days. And I'm not even talking about how ridiculous this rule is. Just because you change the fuel load on all cars, the fastest car is still gonna be the fastest. So unless the driver does a really big driver error, like, I don't know, snoozes through turn 1 on like Baku, he's pretty much gonna be fine. So there was no point in even watching the race grid being fully formed on Sunday, especially when most of the drivers kept more or less the same pace on Sunday, making the last Sunday qualifying lap non-intriguing and useless. Now, finally, we're talking about a rule which doesn't apply to just qualifying, but the actual race itself. And this is the rule that allows any driver that is inside the pit lane road, entry, or exit to overtake another car in that area if it's all done under a safety car. Now, the famous example of this is the Vettel. the 2016 battle. First of all, I find it to be quite ironic that you can overtake in a fairly narrow pit lane road under a safety car at a place where, in fact, no racing is supposed to take place. Because theoretically, let's have a theoretical discussion here. Let's just say we have Latifi and Stroll battling it out in the pit lane, and whoops, both of them just went full BMG AI catch me mode, and now the entire pit lane entry or exit is blocked. I just think that is a very weird rule because whilst it could help several drivers easily overtake those who don't know that rule, what happens if all of them know that rule and then they start going crazy defense ministry role playing right before the speed limit? However, the rule is still valid now, and there haven't been any crashes that I at least know of that happened because others wanted to race in the pit lane exit or entry, except for the most famous recent incident being Ollie Behrman skedaddling it into the wall just because he broke too hard on the wet track, or Liam Lawson completely blocking the pit entry in Singapore, but that's because he just doesn't know how to drive. Now, I just want to remind you that as as of so far, just 3 rules have been covered from least to most weird. However, now we are down to 2 of the most ridiculous ones, and I promise you that the last one is crazy, especially for 2010's F1. Now, this one wasn't necessarily a rule, but just a very unreasonable way the FIA tried to spice up the 2014 Driver Championship. It's pretty self-explanatory. The amount of points that it would get on a typical F1 Grand Prix was double for the Abu Dhabi 2014 race. Now, did it provide a bit of a spice to the championship? Yeah, it kind of did. Now, Lewis Hamilton, you know, the poor current Ferrari victim, goddamn, he had to finish at least in the top 2 to secure the championship due to the double point system. Whereas if the FIA decided to just let nature take control, he would have needed to be at least in the top 6. Now, the rules mainly actually apply to the championship fight between Rosberg and Hamilton because they arrived at the race with a 17-point gap, with others being like, you know, way in the back. However, theoretically speaking, this could have changed up several places of the championship's middle grid, and very ironically, Rosberg was absolute dog water at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, which made the double points rule literally useless for the championship fight. Nonetheless, whilst the rule did provide excitement for everyone watching the race, let's admit that it was kind of unfair to mid-grid teams to suddenly raise the stakes at the end of the season, for most probably the sole reason being that, I don't know, Mercedes was literally using a rocket ship with wheels. And evidently, the FIA did realize that the double points were doo-doo and never did anything like that again, as of yet. All I'm gonna say is that it will be very fun. And alas, we have, in my opinion, the weirdest rule that the FIA has ever pushed through to the sport, and it is none other than the radio ban. Oh, it makes it even old. 10 stops even saying that. The fuck. Now, what this rule did was not ban any radio communication between the driver and the pit box, but the pit box from giving absolutely any feedback about the car's performance and instructions on how to use different car modes. So if the drivers asked the pit box if the car is leaking oil, and the engineers saw from temperature sensors that the chassis was, I don't know, literally melting, all that they would be able to say is just like, I don't know, twin, keep your head up. And as expected, this was really bad. Drivers were furious, which led to races looking stagnant, especially when practically no conversations between the engineers and drivers were taking place that could have been broadcasted for racing drama. Literally every single side loses, maybe except for Ocon. I don't think they even wanted to go to the races, man.